thank you for tuning in and joining us today for this latest in our Innovation at Work webinar series brought to you by MIT Sloan Executive Education. Again, I'm Peter Hurst. I'm the Senior Associate Dean for Executive Education here at the MIT Sloan School. And I am just delighted to be joined in this webinar by my colleague, Bruce Cameron, who is the Director of the Systems Architecture Group and a Senior Lecturer in System Design and Management at MIT, and a teacher in several of our executive education courses at the MIT Sloan School. Bruce is very deep experience as a researcher and educator and entrepreneur, in particular leading perhaps up to his current and long-standing interest in this topic today of platforms as both a technology but also business model for the complex engineering and technology systems. So today, Bruce is going to focus in particular on the case study that he has completed fairly recently on electric vehicles as an example of not only these platform engineering systems in action, but also where there are still many questions to yet be explored and answered. And so this is very topical and timely. And I'm sure as a result, many of you will have questions as Bruce goes along in his presentation. So we've reserved plenty of time later on in this hour to put your questions to Bruce. I will hand over to Bruce in a second. In a few moments, he will go through some opening remarks. If you feel like making comments while that is going on and sharing your thoughts and ideas with everyone who's watching today, feel free to use the chat function on the platform for that. And as Eric mentioned, if you've got specific questions that you'd like me to ask Bruce later on, then if you put those in the Q&A box, that enables other people to see and upvote those, and will help us to sort through and make sure we get through as many questions of your questions as we can. So today, what Bruce is going to cover in a little more detail are the key findings, as I mentioned, from his recent study called the Commonality Study, and what the implications are for the electric vehicle industry. We will learn more broad practices for managing product platforms from that, and he'll be helping us, because this is a business school based program as well, to think about achieving return on investment for the kinds of investments that so many companies are making in these platform-based products. So with that, please, Bruce, I'd like to hand over the stage to you. I will turn off my mic and camera, but I'll be here watching the questions, and we'll come back and help put them to Bruce later on. So thank you very much for being here, Bruce, and let me hand it over to you.
Many thanks for having me, and thank you for moderating, Peter. Well, I'm thrilled to be here with all you guys. I see, Athens to New Hampshire. We have an enormous variety of folks online here, and I'm really excited to hear your comments and to have a discussion around this. So I figured we'd sort of start here. Many of you may have heard, many of you may not have heard. This is what Rivian calls the skateboard. So Rivian, electric vehicles company that's recently had some challenges and a round of layoffs, but that for many years has been sort of at the forefront of this industry, has now actually developed a couple of vehicles and has, among other things, talked about their plan and potentially even source of competitive advantage being the platform that they are developing. So I want to get into that. I want to talk about what does this word platform mean, and as Peter sort of foreshadowed, what have we learned about this from a research perspective at MIT in terms of how companies execute on this strategy. So in short, what's shown on the left-hand side of the screen is in some sense the core of Rivian's product and the core of their IP. And on the right-hand side are some of the vehicle derivatives that they intend to produce on top of this platform. So the R1T and R1S, which are now in the market, an electric pickup truck and an electric SUV. And then also of note, they have a substantial investment from and partnership with Amazon to build a electric commercial vehicle. Now, the sort of big idea of this is don't reinvent the wheel, so to speak. That they're going to go forward with essentially one design, and they're going to see enormous economies of scale from running the same design down a line, and hopefully see some cost advantage to go with that. Now, I think when we start to get into this, the water gets a little murky as you start to sort of dip your toes in. So, among other things, while the initial proposal was to build this electric vehicle on exactly the same platform, it's now come to our attention from a news perspective that it's actually going to be built on a separate line. And because of the duty cycle and other details about the sort of product management of that commercial vehicle, it's going to have a steel, not an aluminum chassis. This is not an uncommon occurrence that as we go after new markets, we end up choosing to customize, and we may end up with less reliance on the original asset, which then becomes a question. So, as Peter alluded to, this is a area of focus, not just from a technical perspective, but from a business perspective. And I think that's really where the interesting discussion comes in. I'm fond of saying that this strategy, this is not a best practice, this is a strategy, is a financial strategy at its heart. It is not fundamentally a technical strategy. You engage in some form of sharing, be it sharing your code across different products, or trying to share hardware, or trying to share different lines in a manufacturing facility. You engage in that sharing because it provides some return on investment for the firm, or because it provides some risk reduction for the firm. There's no net benefit of doing this technically absent those. And while I think that idea comes very easily to mind, we're going to see some leverage on a shared asset by reusing it. The financial results for this are quite mixed, and I'll be sharing that with you today. But as a headline, there's a lot of companies who fronted investment in platforms and have not seen a return from that investment. So why is that? What do we do from a management perspective to evaluate it? And then how do we execute on it such that we give ourselves a fighting chance? So this is sort of the context for the presentation today. So I would like to start with a poll, just because we're here in the EV space. I thought it might be interesting. So we're going to launch a poll here in Zoom that you all get a chance to respond to. And I would like for you to provide your opinion of, in 2035, which of the following is most likely? Gas and electric vehicles are going to split the market. Electric vehicles are going to be more than 80% of the vehicles sold in 2035, or by contrast, gasoline will still be more than 80% of the vehicles sold in 2035. So I'll give you just a moment to take a look at that, and then we'll talk about the results as a group. For clarification, this is just new sales. I see your question there, Dalton. I want to run this worldwide. These are good questions. I'm ignoring hydrogen for the moment, so we're just talking about battery electric vehicles versus gasoline.
One person asking for a hint, Bruce, of what's the breakdown now?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, objection, leading the witness. So for reference, last year we crossed 10% of global sales were electric vehicles. That's the anchor.
So Bruce, we have about 90% who've answered. Do you want me to close it?
Yes, please. Yeah, let's take a look. The wisdom of crowds here. All right, so gasoline electric vehicles will split the market, 47%, almost half. And looks like 41% electric vehicles will be more than 80% of the vehicles sold in 2035. And then we have 12% of you arguing essentially the counterclaim here that gasoline is going to continue to be greater than 80%. So that's very interesting from my perspective. That mirrors past times when I have run similar polls to this. You guys are, I would say, bullish on this. And to me, the question that this really brings up is, how will we think about this transition from a platform's perspective? So there's tons and tons of discussion today on what does adoption look like in the market? What is range anxiety in the market? Which markets are predisposed to this? What tax incentives would help speed this transition, et cetera? But for the purpose of today, I want to take essentially the manufacturer or the OEM's perspective and say, how do you hedge your bets? Should you hedge your bets on this? Questions that are going to come up in this context are if 47% of you say that we're going to continue to have a lot of gasoline vehicles and a set of electric vehicles being produced, should these companies be thinking about platforms that can do both? Sort of suboptimal in both cases, but can do both, and so we get the economies of scale from building electric vehicles and gasoline vehicles on the same line? Or should we split these two and sort of run separate businesses and run separate lines for the two halves of this? Are these similar enough that we might consider it, or are they really so different that we should keep them on separate platforms? I think that's really the question that I want to tee up and sort of take a look from the research data to try and sort of peer into the future along that. So before we get too much further, I want to separate two words here, or two versions of this concept. So this word platforms is almost so broad as to mean nothing, in the sense that I can be a platform and I can be an operating system. I can be a platform and I can be a layer in the market from a business perspective. I can be a platform in a physical sense, the train platform that you stand on while waiting to get to work. I'm going to use two versions of this word and try and sort of hone the definition. So I'm going to use the word product platform to mean what we saw with the Rivian skateboard, notably sharing of hardware and software within the firm. That may well encompass the firm's suppliers, but from one OEM's perspective, an OEM might choose to build a product platform, much as Rivian has and intends to share that quote unquote skateboard between the R1S and the R1T. That is very different from the idea of an industry platform. It's also called a two-sided market. This is an area of substantial research by many, including our very own Michael Cusimano here in the Sloan School of Management at MIT, where in an industry platform, you are explicitly opening up a piece of the firm's scope for contribution from other partners, not suppliers, but partners. So the easiest to hand for this is the App Store, where Apple opened up the device such that others could write software, could come up with all manner of creative apps, etc., that Apple does not per se control. In so doing, hopefully reap the benefits of a series of network effects. So in this platform talk today, I'm going to spend my time on the left-hand side of the chart. There are fascinating questions about industry platforms in the automotive space and in the EV space, but I'm largely going to focus the discussion on the product platform side because, frankly, I think that's where the automakers are going to stand to see more challenges from electric vehicles here. So what does this look like? I think it's very common to look at this from a hardware perspective. I showed an image of the form of the system, the hardware for the Rivian case. We have a variety of different people from automotive and from many other sectors here today, but just looking through the registration list, we have people from Ford, we have people from Volvo, we have people from Honda, we have people from Volkswagen, and we also have people from Cariad coming in here. So I thought this would be a sort of an interesting example. So for those of you that didn't know, Volkswagen has recently split out the group of folks that are writing software for Volkswagen vehicles. And there's I don't have inside knowledge of this, but there are a couple of potential motivations for doing so. This, as I understand it, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Volkswagen. And you could imagine a couple of different ways to think about this. One way to think about this is essentially capture value that is being currently captured by their tier one suppliers. So if you want to think about this as Bosch, what Bosch value is being captured today from autonomous vehicles, from a self-driving functions, et cetera perspective. Volkswagen may be looking to do some vertical integration here and essentially reduce the expense that they purchased that from an external supplier for today. You could also see this move that they have made to develop more cohesive platform solutions across Volkswagen. We're going to sort of centralize software within the company so as to make it more obvious to the 10 brands under management that they are all going to use this set of software. You could see this as a play on new revenue. They may in future consider selling that software themselves as a supplier to others in the sort of automotive sector. There's an analogous argument to that with the Croatian supercar company, Rimac, which is now not only producing supercars, electric supercars, by the way, but they will be selling electric drivetrain components to other manufacturers. So they're both going to be an OEM and a tier one, and Volkswagen could be looking for a similar version of that play. And then a sort of fourth rationale here could be that Volkswagen is trying to insulate their software team from Volkswagen pressures or culture, that whether that be that they are sort of reinventing the wheel one program at a time, or whether that be that they are insufficiently innovative, to say it frankly. These are all questions, but I think it was a very interesting move, and it'll be interesting to see whether any of the other players in the market are play this same game. I think we've seen a number of players in automotive acquire external firms as a way to essentially inorganic innovation in this market. Cruise would be one example of that. And the question, I think, for many of those has been sort of how do we come up to speed in autonomous vehicles technology quickly, yet still capture all of the deep knowledge that's required to develop and launch vehicles. I think this is a challenge that many of these players in the market are wrestling with. So just sort of for a little bit of context in terms of where product platforms get used, and I'm going to provide an introduction to the MIT Commonality Study in just a moment here. This is not a pure hardware play. It is not necessarily a pure software play either. So for I think the better part of the last decade, we've run a program on this at the Sloan School of Management around management of product platforms. And these are some of the firms that are participating. And clearly, you'll see there's a theme here around automotive, as we're talking about today. There's clearly a theme around software. There's clearly a theme around the medical device space. This is a strategy that many different industries have tried on, and yet I think is most prominent in the automotive case. The automotive market has really lived this strategy over the years and has really reaped the benefits. One of the things that I think is most interesting about this is in automotive, you really can't survive without a platform strategy. It's much more a necessity than it is really a differentiator. Whereas in many of these other markets, we tend to see sort of one player adopt a platform strategy and the others adopt different strategies to compete against that platform. So if one player is is vastly expanding the amount of variety that they offer in the market by using a platform to be able to sort of mix and match and customize and throw a bunch of products out there. You often see another player who is focusing their energy on a small number of products. And I think that's sort of an interesting competitive dynamic to think about here. So let's talk a little bit about what we know. This is a sort of quick summary of the MIT Commonality Study. This ran for 8 years with 32 different firms studied in that process. Very deliberately, as you might have guessed from the prior slide, we covered many different industries. And the purpose of that, from a research perspective, was to understand whether there were best practices in some industries that could be ported over to others, but also from a research perspective to understand how different the execution of this strategy is in different markets according to their capital structure or according to their technology life cycle or other factors. When we got into the study, what we knew at the beginning was that the magnitude of financial benefits would be very different across the players. So if we're looking at semiconductor capital equipment and its life cycle and its CapEx, we knew that the benefits of having a platform and producing a bunch of derivatives of your capital equipment on that platform would be very different from what the business jets world was doing or what automotive was doing. What frankly really surprised us when we got into the study, though, was the extent to which the central tension around platforms was the same. There's always this tension on sort of what are the economies of scale, or what are the benefits I could reap from sort of doing the same process over and over and getting much better at it, versus what innovation and creativity is on tap from building unique products specific to a market. That is always a sort of tension that firms in this area are dealing with. And what really surprised us when we got into the study is that the management tactics that the firms used recurred as patterns over and over and over again, which I'm going to share with you here today, and which we've since published in a number of papers. So that was really what gave us some, if you want to think about statistical power in comparing different companies, even though we knew that the benefits would be different. So the major findings from this study were really twofold. As I described, the tension between scale and customization is really a management challenge here. How do we create the set point for that? What risk do we want to take on in terms of potential disruptive technologies or not take on? And then the second finding, probably the most widely known finding from the MIT Commonality Study, is that most firms see erosion against their commonality goals. So we coined the term divergence for this phenomena. I'll share several examples of that on the next slide, but the reality of this is a difficult strategy to execute on, and it is by no means a best practice. I think if you listen to conversations that happen inside many firms around this, it sounds like a best practice. We should avoid reinventing the wheel. Of course, we should centralize this. Of course, it makes sense to invest in a platform. And the reality is it doesn't always make sense. And further, it bears significant risk, to the ROI that could be delivered from that investment when the sharing of code or sharing of parts erodes over time. So I want to sort of unpack that a little bit, and then we can talk about that in the electric vehicles space. So the poster child for this study is a somewhat well-known debacle in the U.S. Department of Defense, also known as the Joint Strike Fighter. So for those of you not in the aerospace market or not familiar with this, that's okay. This was 3 military aircraft that went through congressional approval around the same time, and in their sort of infinite wisdom, the decision was taken to build them on one platform. Really, I think the simplicity of the reasoning at the time was, looks like three of you all want new planes. Can't we just do it once, and then you can sort of tweak as necessary? So this program became the poster child for challenges with this, in the sense that it went massively over budget. They are in operations now. There's one of these for the Air Force, takes off on a runway, lands on a runway. There's one for the Navy, takes off on a runway, lands on an aircraft carrier. They really slam into the deck. It's quite a different role. And there's one of these that looks like a Harrier jump jet. If any of you are familiar with that, this thing can essentially land vertically. Through this process, they had an initial goal that those three aircraft would share 80 to 90% of parts. They had, over time, new goals for software that emerged along similar lines, that they would share a majority. Today, this program is down by at least half relative to that original goal. It depends on how you measure it, which is why you'll see sort of a range given there. As one example, I saw actually a recent estimate of what fraction of depot process would be shared across the three. And the estimate that was given was sub 20%. So in some areas has fallen even further. So this is a very substantial erosion. The question is the massive cost overrun that this program lived correlated with the fall in commonality, or was it causal? Right? Was the fall in commonality the cause of this failure to come in on budget and certainly on time? Now, if that's the poster child, what really surprised us in the study was that this phenomena is frequently repeated in many other industries in very different cost structures. So we saw this in consumer products, where you build hundreds of thousands or millions of units a year. And similarly, we saw this all the way in commercial satellites, where you might build a handful a year at a cost of potentially several $100 million. So that told us that the central reason that this happens is not a unique situation arising from the pressures that come with building only a couple units a year and the customer customization preferences that are given there. And it's similarly not because of the mass production environment that happens in many consumer products. This is a fundamental tension that occurs in all platforms, and which can really challenge the ROI that we see from this strategy. So, I think one way to put this in the context of our EV case study here is divergence is an ever-present tension between the idea of you produce, design, go after a market in such a way that you build for purpose, versus the idea of scale and delivering variety on some form of reduced cost base. So just as one example of that, I think as many of you in the audience are aware, Tesla has both a trunk in the front and a trunk in the rear. And that's because the original Model S, and since then several other derivatives, are designed as, electric vehicles first and only. Tesla does not produce any vehicles that have shared hybrid or gasoline engine versions. And what that means is you can design the front trunk so as to store capacity or your kids in this hilarious picture that I grabbed off the internet. That is not necessarily the case in vehicles where you are attempting to leverage an underlying platform that may produce both electric as well as non-electric variants. So as one example of that, the Chevy Volt, before the Bolt, there was the Volt. I don't know who at Chevy came up with these two names that are so similar, but that was their choice to make. First generation Chevy Volt was built on the Delta II platform within GM, which was shared with the Chevy Cruze, I believe actually originally designed by GM's Korean subsidiary, and then essentially reused, if you will, for the design of the Chevy Volt. In this situation, GM was very much trying to build a single platform that could have multiple variants so as to leverage the investment that was required to design that platform in the first place, but came with a bunch of compromises. And some of those compromises are placement of the batteries, packaging in the front trunk, protection of space for both electric motors as well as gasoline engines, in which case you have to protect more and more and more space that is not usable by the consumer. These are just some examples of it. Say nothing of the overall vehicle mass targets and other that would be in some sense derived from the platform. So when is this a good thing and when is it a bad thing? I think is a fair question here. What I think many people's first instincts is, divergence is bad. You had a target, you didn't meet the target, therefore you didn't push hard enough on retaining the target. And what we've seen through this research has been that there are situations in which this makes a lot of sense. It is okay to diverge. I think you can ask this question in the Joint Strike Fighter case. Was it an unreasonable target to begin with? And therefore, the sooner we dispense with that target, the more quickly we will come back to reality and be able to actually put product out the door. I think the way that we think about this, there are acceptable and unacceptable reasons for this divergence. In the acceptable case, you are trading some future benefit against what you know is going to be an increase in the near term in cost. Right? Designing something twice for slightly different markets is always going to be more expensive than designing a common asset once and re-leveraging it. So we know that you'll see this, arrow going down in cost for development. We know that we're going to spend more money to design it twice. But in the acceptable reasons for divergence, that is offset by some future gain. And some of the situations in which you might find yourself where it is acceptable to do this are the market changed, right? If Chevy's read on the market for electric vehicles was that the common penalty associated with sharing a chassis with non-electric vehicles and the compromises that come with that were getting eaten alive in the market by a built-for-purpose derivative from Tesla. There's no heroism at that stage. If GM had realized that, there's no heroism in trying to stick to the original platform. That's the point at which you pivot away from commonality and recognize that. And similarly, we've seen situations where the platform has inbuilt some old version of the technology that cannot be carried by a new variant. And similarly, that's a case where there's substantial market upside for moving away from the platform. And similarly, learning during development, you can see that this is a descriptive set of research findings. This is not intended to be used as a change form, because in any product manager's handbook, you can assert we learned something during development or the market changed in some way. But I'm trying to sort of look back at the history and say, what are the things that firms recognized were acceptable reasons for divergence? There are some cases where we recognize this technology was trickier than we thought it was going to be, or the market needs between these two markets are not as close as we originally forecast. Therefore, time to move away from this. Now, by that same token, though, there are a bunch of reasons that this is completely unacceptable. And in these situations, the dynamic that you see is execution straight up impacting our margin, impacting our return on investment. We know this is more expensive in terms of near-term development cost, but there's no carrot in the future that we are searching for. We're really just shooting ourselves in the foot, so to speak. So how does that happen? Failure to invest and define the platform is a very common failure mode for this. And what I mean by that is these platforms require substantial investments. They require centralization of resources to come up with the platform in the first place. And the firms that assert this is just designing smarter. We'll just sort of design it once and it'll work for everybody. Often find themselves looking at divergence as market number 2 and market number 3 come online, and do not see a substantial sort of reusable qualified asset to pick up on. Similarly, we see variant suboptimization, which is a sort of a fancy term for not in my goals. There are lots of situations I've seen where firms look to, for example, save $100 on one product that is half of the total volume, and in so doing, cost the other half $500. But if your goal is to reduce the cost of your product or increase the margin of your product only, there are tons of decisions in which you would actually make net negative decisions for the firm as a whole, but good decisions from your perspective. You're going to sub-optimize. We see a bunch of them as well that are failure to see lifecycle benefit. The majority of firms that do this don't do this strictly from a one single discipline perspective. They do this for combined return across their supply chain, across their procurement organization, potentially a reduction in their engineering effort, et cetera. And the firms that I have seen where they argue, among others, we're trying to save engineering time, often don't have a strong handle on what are the long-term benefits that we might see from the strategy. If we can't make it work from an engineering time perspective, they might choose to go do it separately. And then the last one, and from my perspective, the most fun and sort of the most challenging from a management perspective is intentional pursuit of uniqueness. You hired me to be a brilliant software engineer. Here's how I made the software brilliant. I made it from scratch. You didn't hire me to go search our internal software repository or GitHub and find whoever else's code that we could reuse to do this thing. They didn't comment it well. They didn't do it the way I liked. It doesn't match the data structure I was hoping for. Whatever the reason, this failure mode is most dependent on your management being able to tell the difference between somebody coming up with a brilliant solution that impacts customers versus someone playing in a technical sandbox that doesn't necessarily have a bearing on the value proposition of the product. So hopefully that gives you a sense of sort of when divergence happens and why. Just sort of coming back to the Rivian case that I started with here, I think there are two derivatives in the consumer market that are built on the same one. I actually saw a comment in the webinar chat that there are test vehicles for the electric third derivative on the streets of Seattle. That was really neat to see. I think as they sort of mature this platform, whether it really becomes two separate products, if they choose, a long and a short wheelbase version of the delivery vehicle, or if they choose to further refine their performance of the delivery vehicle when they learn the use case and how it's operated by drivers, whether these two will sort of move further apart from each other, to me is a very substantial risk to Rivian overall. If the company was capitalized on the understanding that this significant investment in this the skateboard was going to be leveraged across all three of these, if you then have an amortization schedule that does not allow you to share it as widely as you thought, that becomes a financial problem for the firm. So I thought we might take a look at just a couple of other firms to compare and contrast here. So Toyota has been a very notable outlier in the market for electric vehicles, in that they have really not focused their attention on pure electric. Toyota has produced the most well-known, from my perspective, hybrid vehicle, Toyota Prius. For many, many years now, they've expanded the variety of Toyota Prius offerings that are available. I remember an airport poster that had a beautiful sort of cartoon green landscape with 4 Toyota Priuses, and it said sort of a Toyota Prius to fit your needs, right? They've opened a market niche and then have really landed an army of derivatives that are almost entirely hybrids. So this is a big question for Toyota in the sense of they're making bets about what the future architecture of electric vehicles is going to look like. And this bet on hybrids has not been echoed by every other player. I think one of the things that's most notable for Toyota is their platforms aim to share between hybrid vehicles like the Toyota Prius and non-hybrid vehicles. So they're looking to sort of maximize economies of scale with this by running Corollas on a Prius platform and to see all of the associated benefits that go with that. And that's been a statement for them. It's been really notable in the market. But given that the Toyota CEO recently turned over, longtime CEO has exited to be replaced by the president of Lexus. I think what's really interesting to look at the intersection there is how is this being messaged and what is the new group CEO framing this message. And one of the things that really stood out to me has been that this new person has been very adamant that they're going to develop an EV only platform and hopefully see some benefit from that. Now, Toyota's platforms are called Toyota Next Generation Architecture. I showed them on the previous slide there, and they have some, let's count. At least 5 of them underway. There was in 2019, they began development of TNGA-E, which was intended to be for electric vehicles, but it's been a very small run of their total fraction of volume, especially when you think about a company of Toyota's size. And it's very evident that they previously, under the former CEO, didn't see the need to develop an EV-only platform. And it's going to be really interesting to see, I think, sort of what that means for Toyota going forward. So looking at this, I think we can ask the question of sort of how do we prevent divergence and what management tactics have been used in firms that have been successful with this. So I thought this was one. This is actually a lesson and an example from BMW here that I think would be interesting to discuss. BMW, like Toyota, has several brands under management. For those of you that don't know, among others, BMW manages the Mini brand, and I've sort of cartooned this chart to read sort of more generally here. But one of the things that we observe about firms that do this well is they are able to bring co-investment across different P&Ls if the platform merits it. And so the problem in some sense that they were trying to solve with this was historically BMW used to have this sort of first through the door setup for who pays for it. So if you're coming first to market, you would have to pay for all of the shared charges. And that can be a huge disincentive to fronting new technologies or to fronting new investments. So BMW then developed this sort of shared practice internally that was, if you're coming to market anytime in the following window, you must help pay for the platform. And I think they were really wise about this. Now, the cost allocation that you choose can be different by firm, in their case, by projected volume you were going to produce. So if this is sort of a big idea, I thought we might launch the second of 2 polls that I have here. Does your company do this? I'm sort of curious. And then we'll sort of wrap up and I'll take some questions to conclude here. All right, Eric, you'll call the ball here. So this is interesting. So relatively few do. I would say sort of looks like 20% of you do have some means to share platform investments across different brands or different P&Ls within the firm. But a majority of you don't or don't know. And I think that's an important question. I started this talk with a statement. This is a financial strategy. You have to be able to speak to it from a benefits perspective, produce the business case and what it looks like, but you also have to use the financial levers at your disposal, like this one, to bring it to existence. The financial structure creates incentives within the firm that must be reflected to really build a platform strategy. So just to sort of wrap up here, I'll give a couple more comments and then I think we'll close. The market for electric vehicles will entail a significant recapitalization for many firms. So this was recent news from actually Valentine's Day this year, a couple of weeks ago. Ford announced the Cologne plant, they were simultaneously cutting 3,800 jobs on lines that are associated with gasoline vehicles, but they're also planning $2 billion in CapEx for producing electric vehicles. And if you can't design products that can be built on the same line, this has huge capital intensive implications for the firm. And I think that's really, to me, that's the interesting tension in this market today. Just as an aside here, I don't know if any of you saw the amount of capital spent on wind and solar last year exceeded the amount of capital globally spent on upstream oil and gas. So, this is a pattern we're going to see recur across a number of industries. So I think that really just to try and sort of put a cherry on the argument here, there's quite a debate in the research community about the hybrid trap. I don't know if any of you have heard this term before. The poster child for this, in my view, is this BlackBerry that had both a touch screen as well as a keyboard. And there are a number of people here at MIT and otherwise. So my colleague Jim Utterback, along with a number of others, produced this article here, which I highly recommend, where they assert that hybrids are a trap, that markets rarely stabilize on sort of gasoline and electric, but rather sort of pick a winner and run with it, all electric or nothing, or gasoline and then dispense with electric. On the other side of this argument, there are colleagues of mine. I'm citing a paper here from David Keith that takes a look at the stepping stones argument. There's a lot of arguments that are made about this, the potential for hybrids to provide a mechanism to learn about new technology while also underwriting the investment in the platform with existing business, which is arguably the Toyota argument that I was showing a couple of slides ago. So to me, I think the stepping stones argument is going to win out. That's my personal projection. I think we are going to continue to see hybrid vehicles for some time, particularly because of the distribution for charging stations, and their existing distribution for gas stations is such a huge requirement for broad scale adoption of electric vehicles. But those of you on the call may have an opinion about that, and I'd be interested to have a discussion on it. So let me wind up, and we'll take some questions at the end here. So, in terms of findings from the MIT Commonality Studies, this strategy works well in mature industries which have well-characterized variety. It does not work as well on the front end of industry maturity, where we have a whole bunch of players competing and who don't necessarily know what customers are willing to trade off and not, that don't necessarily know what kind of performance to expect from technology, and that don't necessarily know what the trend in the market will be. And there's significant uncertainty in that in terms of EV only today for me, and I think that's going to challenge the ability of firms to invest in platforms, be they electric only or hybrid. Second, many firms realize lower levels of commonality than originally expected. This is the case for the Chevy Volt, and we've certainly seen that in many other industries. The automotive market is certainly mature in its approach to platforms, but I think this electric vehicles is really going to test their ability to manage divergence when it comes up. And then the last point I'll make here is that a platform strategy inevitably touches a number of different firm functions. This really is a management problem. It's not a technology problem. It hinges on your ability to function or your dysfunction across marketing and product management and engineering and marketing and supply chain. And I think that remains one of the reasons that this is so difficult to execute on, is because it really spans the firm. So I would love to take your questions. Peter, can I hand to you to moderate?
Yes, great. Thank you, Bruce. We've got a number of comments and questions coming in, and maybe we could start with one that was, what was your answer? Actually, you sort of hinted at it to your first poll, and before you say that, there was a question as well about to what extent do predictions and assessments of what sort of market conditions are and are going to be really drivers of these different strategies that you're seeing. So, for example, while in the US, maybe there's a sense that there is a lot of infrastructure being built and government support and market readiness for EV adoption. That's not true in many other parts of the world. And so a company like Toyota that has a global market may be being influenced by that.
Yeah. Well, my personal answer to the first poll is that I believe that these two technologies are going to continue to split the market for the very foreseeable future, for exactly the reasons that you outlined. I think the distribution, of electric vehicle charging stations is a huge infrastructure challenge. You can even go back and look at, when did cars really take off in the early 1900s? They didn't really take off until we built roads. We didn't really, this technology had a complementary asset that was required for its adoption, and that's charging stations for electric vehicles. I think the future is hybrids from my perspective. I think that that has tremendous technology benefits, and it also, from a firm perspective, is a way to hedge risk on this. And the reality is there's still a ton of market adoption risk. This isn't just all technology risk that these firms are taking. It's risk on what are people's preferences? How strongly do they feel about this? Are they willing to vote with their dollars? And in wealthy economies, there's more willingness to do that in order to try and speed change and be early adopters. But as you roll this out further and further, you get to a population that is much more economic in their decision making, and I think that's going to challenge the rollout. But that's just my personal opinion. I don't have research to substantiate that.
Well, we'll do this webinar again in 10 years, and you can come back and see how you did. There's a whole set of questions that people were asking. I think that were in part definitional, but perhaps you could comment on. One set was to do with you appear to be defining platforms. The platform itself is a pretty complex kind of substructure onto which you sort of add some modular customizations. But I think quite a few people in various industries, whether it's in hardware or software or even in pharmaceutical, were thinking about modularity, where essentially you have a set of defined components from which you design and create products, but there isn't sort of necessarily some common higher level platform. What's your view of that?
Yes, so I think that's very fair. One of the apt comparisons for this is Lego. I would like to build Lego for my industry or for my product that has been successful in some markets. In that case, the platform is not necessarily a physical asset, but the interfaces, right? The reason that Lego works together is because of those little nubs on the Legos, and they're spaced the same distance apart. That absolutely fits the definition of platform, in the sense that you're still looking to share assets and reuse knowledge within the firm for the purpose of a financial gain within the firm. You can grow it beyond that in terms of modularity. There's lots of people who ask about, will we see open architectures or or could the firm adopt this as an industry standard? That is a fascinating area of discussion and strategy, but to me, really quite a different area than product platforms, meaning sharing of assets within the firm.
Great, thank you. Another set of questions had to do with, when you're doing this research and you're evaluating the success or not of these product platform strategies. You talked about the Joint Strike Fighter. Some might say that 150% overrun on a defense project is pretty good.
Yes.
How do you sort of establish the baselines? Because there aren't that many examples to sort of reference against, right? And say, or control studies that you could do.
Yeah, that program originally began as 3 aircraft for the price of 1.7. Now they're probably 3 aircraft for the price of 4.5. But what if the base rate is every program goes over budget anyways? They got to 4.5. It could have been 8. To me, that's part of the reason that this works well in mature industries is you have a much better characterization of what the financial outlook is and the stability of the market in which you're going to invest. There are tremendous cases where, if you're investing in ChatGPT and you feel like the future of AI is conversational AI, you might be willing to tolerate a 10x overrun on your original budget if there's a big first mover advantage in that market, or if that allows you to learn about consumer preferences and technology in such a way that you can build a whole future revenue stream out of it. So it's very tied to the strategy of the firm, in my view. How you set that up, we could speak to the U.S. government case, but I think the more interesting case is the commercial case here. It has to be an instrument of the firm's strategy. It should never be seen as just a best practice. Of course, we do that. It entails risk.
Great, thank you. And I'm just looking and seeing that we're almost out of time. So let me thank you, Bruce, on behalf of all of us here who've been watching and engaging with you for this fascinating presentation and great discussion. Thank you all from all over the world for joining us. As you can see on the slides, Bruce does teach a course in these questions called Managing Product Platforms, Delivering Variety and Realizing Synergies. That's coming up soon, April 10th to 13th, in a live online format. So no need to come to snowy Boston. You can see Bruce on the screen just like this and engage with him in that program if that's of interest. Please check it out. Thank you again to the team for putting together this latest Innovation at Work webinar. There will be more to come in the Innovation at Work webinar series. Keep an eye on our website and our social media out for those. And we will look through all the questions because we didn't manage to get to all of them for sure. And try to put a short article on our blog together to address any other questions that we didn't manage to get to. But for now, let me once again just thank you, Bruce. This has been fascinating and educational and inspiring, as always, when we hear from you. And we look forward to seeing you again. We look forward to seeing all of our participants again in future webinars and hopefully in some executive education programs on campus and online. Thank you all.